Namaskar. It's a privilege to pay this tribute to Dr. ZARINA, a distinguished historian. I myself am interested in history. I am an ecologist, but one of the aspects of ecology I am quite interested in is ecological history over time, and I will try to talk a little bit about all these historical developments that have gone on, which have led to the current situation, especially on the western Ghats of the country. Now, western Ghats, this hill range, has been my subject of interest, of affection, of love for a long time, since a young age. I was born in Pune, which is very close to the crestline of the Western Ghats, and from a young age I have wandered, because my father was very much interested in bird watching and trekking on the hills of the Western Ghats. All of this led eventually to my chairing this Western Ghat Ecology Expert Panel, and its report was commissioned in 2010, it was submitted in 2011, but it was a report which was very honest and transparent, and I had mentioned a number of issues which were unpalatable to the powers that be. Therefore, an attempt was made to suppress it in 2011. As soon as it was submitted, the government decided not to make it public, but there were members of the public interested, and in fact from Kerala many of them. They applied under Right to Information Act that the report be disclosed. The government made some absurd claims also. At one point they said it was against national security interests and of course against so-called development interests. But the Central Information Commissioner and later the Delhi High Court rejected this and said that the report must be immediately made available. So eventually it was made available in 2012. But our recommendation, strong recommendation, was that report is in English, but it should be translated in the Western Ghat regional languages, including of course Malayalam, and this was not done. So the report was on the ministry's website in English and in a sense accessible only to a limited number of people of the Western Ghats. The majority cannot use English medium. Fortunately, in Kerala, the Kerala Shastra Sahitya Parishad, this popular science movement people, they translated it in Malayalam, and because of that, it was widely available in Kerala and people understood the provisions, and with that began a process of discussion, broad discussion around this report. One of the issues was in Kerala, burning at that time and continuing to burn, rock quarries and the environmental damage by the rock quarries, and along with the environmental damage, the impact on the local communities. So I was invited to give a series of lectures after, as I said, in 2012 it was published in Kerala, and one of these set of lectures was at Aranmula in 2013, and I was told that a very persistent and notable agitation was being launched by people affected by the Chembanmudi rock quarry. This is in the Ranni division of Patnamthitta district. So it was suggested that I should visit that, and I was quite interested, and I was taken to the site very interestingly, because there had been so much propaganda against the report by vested interests like the rock quarry owners, that Kerala government thought it would be a good idea to have police protection offered to my vehicle. So it was an interesting experience driving with a police vehicle in front of me to this Chembanmudi quarry. Anyway, at the Chembanmudi quarry, it was very clear that it had manifold adverse impacts. The Geological Survey of India had also reported quite honestly a series of adverse impacts on the watercourses, on agriculture, and then of course the local people, they were, because of the dust of the quarry, suffering from asthma and many other diseases, and an agitation had been launched which had been going on for almost 12 months, spearheaded primarily by women belonging to Kudumbashri groups. And I was taken to the quarry, and there were reports of what was going on in the quarry. One of the more horrifying reports was that a large number of tribals from Jharkhand, they were the laborers available to the quarries, and they were serving there. And in 2013, there was very little means of communication. Today's smartphones and so on had not come into being. So they were completely isolated. They were, the Jharkhandis, completely cut off from any contacts with relatives and friends, and from time to time there were accidents. And when there was an accident, then the Jharkhandi tribals, some of them died. The quarry owners simply threw them into the pit, and of course the rubble coming afterwards buried them. This was a tragic thing that was going on, was reported by the local people. Who were these Jharkhandis, and who were the local people, the Kudumbashri women who were talking about it, and who were the administrators who were strongly supporting the quarry operation? In ecological terms, we say that the quarry operators and the administrators supporting them and the politicians supporting them are biosphere people. In ecology, biosphere people are the people who have money and who have access to products from a wide range of areas, localities, and they would be eating, amongst other things, apples from California and kiwi fruits from New Zealand, and using cars imported from South Korea, and so the whole world is accessible to them, and they have no stake in any local ecology. The farmers and the Kudumbashri women who are tied to the locality and dependent on natural resources of the locality are termed ecosystem people. And the Jharkhandis who are alienated from the resources of their own locality are ecological refugees. There is a process that has been going on of conversion of ecosystem people into ecological refugees very strongly today in India, but interestingly enough, roots of this are to be seen in England. In 1088, William the Conqueror became King of England, and he started a process which was called enclosure of the commons. Enclosure of the commons meant that till then the local communities had their own community management system, and they cultivated the land as commons land, and they hunted and they subsisted on the cultivation and hunting. Now William the Conqueror banned all this. Suddenly the community owned commons were enclosed and became properties of the king and of the various lords affiliated to the king. Now this was of course a process that was resisted very staunchly by the farmers, hunters of and the community land managers of England, the ecosystem people of England. This went on for almost 3 centuries. There were violent protests and they were very brutally suppressed. In the end, people had to surrender, but meanwhile, the community managed forest resources, well managed forest resources were wiped out, and most of the wildlife of the England was wiped out. So by 15th century, England was in a state where essentially no woods were left, and there were large number of people had their livelihood destroyed. They had become converted, as I said, ecological terms, from ecosystem people into ecological refugees. With the forest gone and the woods gone, in the winter, there is a very serious problem of heat. Notably at that time, so-called Little Ice Age started, so that there was desperate need for heating, and that need was fulfilled by coal. England, it turns out, has very rich coal fields, and the ecological refugees, these people who were driven off their land, their livelihoods destroyed when the community lands were taken over by lords and the king, they became the laborers in these coal fields and working under horrific conditions. There are descriptions of the very poor conditions, inhuman conditions under which they had to operate in the coal mines. Now a question arose which led to the scientific revolution in England and Europe. The question was that water was seeping into these mines and the water had to be pumped out, and how much the hand pumps can pump out. It turns out that the hand pumps can pump out only from a limited depth, something like 32-33 feet. If water is deeper than that, hand pumps cannot pump it out beyond that limit. So what is the what is this limit for come out of? There was then a scientific hypothesis propounded that it has to do with the pressure of the atmosphere, that one atmosphere exerts a pressure which will allow water to be pumped up by about 32 feet, no more than that. This scientific inquiry now led to the following interesting effect, that pumps were being fabricated by the artisans, like our blacksmiths and so on, and the deduction that it is the atmosphere's pressure that is setting this limit was a part of the scholars' mathematical deduction. So these pumps, they brought together the mathematical deduction with the skills of the artisans, and that led to the development of experimental science, and with that a number of new developments. That was the beginning of the European science. Now at the same time, desperate for more resources, the Europeans started moving out, and England in a sense was well placed for this because it had long tradition of shipbuilding and ships moving out. So British ships and of course other ships like the famous Columbus's ships from Spain and so on from Europe, they started moving in search of new resources, and they reached United States. To cross this vast Atlantic Ocean required two things. It required proper navigation and it required very good measurement of time. Newton, Isaac Newton, who is the great scientist, his work made possible this navigation and this very accurate measurement of time. And it was then Newton's science which helped them colonize United States and much of South America, Australia, and there they went. With them they had another resource which was guns. The guns of course had started much earlier. Gunpowder was invented by Chinese and guns were being used even in some 8th, 9th century in China. From there guns had reached Arabs, and from Arabs they came to Europe and to England. But it was in England that their development now became part of the scientific technological development. And with these guns and of course with the steel and so on, they could easily defeat, wipe out the American Indian natives of North America, have resources of that vast continent at their disposal, could conquer Africa. There they found another resource which is slaves. So on large scale the Europeans enslaved Africans and these black slaves came to United States. Notably Jefferson, who was one of the, I think, third or so president of the United States around 1801, is supposed to have said all men are created equal. This is a part of great hypocrisy. If all men are created equal, then on Jefferson had these huge cotton farms, of course on land taken over by wiping out the American Indians, and he had as many as 600 black slaves slaving under very poor conditions on his plantations, and he was declaring all men are created equal. I mean, you know, humans are of course well known for their incredible hypocrisy. This is one of the examples. Now, coming to India and Jharkhand, it was just around that time that British had started conquest of India. As you know, with the 1757 Battle of Plassey, they had taken control of Bengal and the adjacent areas, including Jharkhand. So they now wanted to, of course, drain the resources of India. Dadabhai Nauroji had this famous phrase and the writings, drain of India by the British. In the name of civilizing India, of course, they started draining India's resources. Now, this drain of resources was supported by declaring all community management illegitimate, as they had done earlier in England when the commons were declared as no longer under community management but taken over by the king and the lords. So here the representative of the King of England, the British government, East India Company and the government took over the community lands of Jharkhand tribals, and as they had done earlier with their ecosystem people, these ecosystem people of Jharkhand were converted into ecological refugees. They were made to work under conditions like slaves essentially, although they were not quite like, converted into as the Africans were into actual slaves, but slave-like conditions. They had to work under on tea plantations of Assam, and then on the Western Ghats, there were tea and coffee estates being set up. There was a very interesting debate about shifting cultivation on Western Ghats. The tea coffee planters pleaded that actually there were British administrators themselves who were saying that this is a good practice, it gives satisfactory livelihood to people, it should not be banned. But the coffee planters and tea planters of Western Ghats, they said that no, you must ban it. Unless you ban it, we will not get laborers to work on our plantations. And then this was banned. It meant that a large number of people suddenly were deprived of their livelihoods. They had no other go but to accept living and working essentially like slaves, as they were doing in the Assam tea plantations, on the Western Ghat tea coffee plantations, for example, in the Idukki district and Wayanad district and so on. And indeed, even as of almost today, the tea plantation labor in Idukki works essentially under slave conditions and is subjected to disasters. All this was perpetrated using the Forest Department as its tool. And the Forest Department propagated a theory that which was completely contrary to facts on the ground, that it was the people of India in their community managed lands which were destroying forest, that they were the enemies, and the Forest Department had the duty to counter these enemies of the forest, the people of India, the common people of India. This was then dressed up as scientific management by the Forest Department to save the forest. But actually, all historical data shows that what the Forest Department was doing was to give essentially large chunks of forest for destruction to tea and coffee planters, for British cantonments, and then the rest of it to produce teak. So the forests were being cut down to produce teak for the British Navy and the British gun carriages and so on. The claims of scientific sustainable management were simply a fraud, and Forest Department established its tyrannical hold. Mahatma Gandhi saw this and he opposed this. In his book Hind Swaraj and later he has commented. When asked what he thought of Western civilization, Gandhi is supposed to have said it would be a good idea. As if he meant seriously. It was not civilization, it was plunder of India and the suppression of Indians in the name of civilizing them. So he had proposed that India should become a republic of self-reliant villages. That was his vision. And this vision was, in the more modern context, elaborated by his economist Shishya, J.C. Kumarappa, who wrote a book called Economy of Permanence. People are now talking about sustainable development ever since 1972 Stockholm Conference, but Kumarappa has really very well elaborated this idea in his Economy of Permanence, which he wrote in the jail when he was jailed for participating in independence movement satyagrahas. I must tell here a little interesting story about Kumarappa. Jawaharlal Nehru inducted him into his first planning advisory group, and for that meeting in this I think Teen Murti house where Nehru was living and where this meeting was called, Kumarappa came in a horse-drawn tonga, and when he came with this horse-drawn tonga, the people at the gate stopped him and said, "No, this tonga poses danger to the traffic and therefore you have to get down and walk." He said, "Why should this tonga be posing danger to the traffic?" They said, no, the cars will come and the cars will hit the tonga." He said, "Then it is the cars which are posing danger to the traffic," which was of course the case in a way, but he was forced to get off the tonga. This is what Nehru did in fact. The hold of the elite on the society was further strengthened in Nehru's regime, and the whole vision of Gandhi and Kumarappa that the common people will come to play a major role in the country, and Gandhi had explicitly said that they should be freed of the tyranny of the forest department. All that was rejected, and we started a whole series of developments, amongst them large number of dams, and notably enough the level of destruction of forests and injustice to the people whose farms were submerged under the reservoirs was very huge, and all these was providing resources for the industry and the urban populations. People of Mumbai, for instance, today, or any other major city, they are actually subsisting with their huge demands on the resources on this forest that has been destroyed to meet their needs. But this they completely ignore, and the British elitist theory that it is the India's common people which are destroying the forest is being propagated. Forest Department has not been deprived of any of these powers under colonial rule. In fact, the powers that British had confirmed on the Forest Department to take, so to say, treat people as enemies has been further strengthened in independent India. It was even further strengthened in 1972 with the Wildlife Protection Act, which has brought the whole country under the tyranny of Forest Department. Let me cite one very interesting example from Kerala. This is Kadanad Panchayat. Kadanad is in Kottayam district, and it is for a long time being threatened by rock quarries on the hills adjacent to the Panchayat. I will not go into those details, but fortunately, despite certain blips, Indian democracy has continued functioning, and number of pro-people acts have been passed, among them the Biological Diversity Act. So, under the original act, the local communities, they establish biodiversity management committees and prepare people's biodiversity registers to document the local biodiversity, including the habitats and impacts on them, and suggest a management plan. So, the Kadanad Panchayat documented quite carefully how the rock quarries are destroying the biodiversity and natural habitat. This then was taken to the Kerala Biodiversity Board to examine. The Biodiversity Board agreed that the document by the people in of Kadanad Panchayat was very sound and reflected reality. There was a case in Kerala High Court, and the Kerala High Court gave the judgment that the quarries should be banned because they are destroying ecology and the habitat. So, this now posed a serious problem to all the vested interests which were making huge amount of money by these rock quarries. Most of them are in fact illegal. There is a report of Kerala legislature itself which says that something like 90% of these are illegal, without permission of the local panchayat and without permission of the even of the district collector. They are making a lot of money. So, these moneyed supporters of rock quarry then came to Kadanad Panchayat, told them that if you persist, then what will happen? Your area will be declared as an ecologically sensitive zone, and all that will happen is as soon as it is declared as ecologically sensitive, Forest Department's tyrannical grip will strangle you. You better withdraw your resolution. And poor Kadanad people, Panchayat people were frightened and withdrew their resolution. This was 2011-12. Now in 2021, I think, there were major disasters in form of landslides in Kerala. One of them was Kuttikkal. Kuttikkal is a village which is fairly close, some 20 kilometers from Kadanad, about which I talked about. Now, these Kuttikkal people had for 10 years been crying hoarse that the rock quarry is destroying their agriculture and posing serious danger. That actually materialized in terms of huge landslide and large number of people being killed under the rock fall in Kuttikkal. At the time of that rock fall, a young reporter from one of the Kerala TVs came to see me, and he said he is from the Kuttikkal village, and people are just completely helpless. They don't know what to do. All that they now see before them is to simply leave the village and go seeking employment as laborers somewhere in urban areas. This is exactly what the biosphere people, those in power, want, because there was this interesting announcement by the Chief Minister of Karnataka at that time, after the long lockdown because of the corona was over. Very large number of laborers working in Bangalore city wanted to leave and go back to their villages. And the Chief Minister of Karnataka stopped the trains which would have taken them back, and in fact in press conference openly said that he stopped the trains at the behest of the builders, because builders wanted to retain these people to work under with very poor wages under difficult conditions. So this is what is, many of these were in fact also from Jharkhand, just like the laborers at Chembanmudi. So it is this process of conversion of ecological ecosystem people into ecological refugees this is going on. Will it ever be reversed? Very interestingly, there are signs that it can be reversed, although on a small scale. In Gadchiroli and Chandrapur districts of Maharashtra, which are basically Gond tribal districts, because with the implementation of the Forest Rights Act, number of villagers have been given community forest rights. So now they have access to resources of their community lands, and they are actually now able to reverse the process. What they are able to do is, using these resources, there are very valuable minor forest resources. They don't have access to timber, but a large number of fruit and flowers and many other medicinal plants, huge resources which can bring them some decent income. They are using this decent income to change the pattern where the ecosystem people, these Adivasis were just like Jharkhand Adivasis, earlier being subjected to pressures to leave the villages and work, in this case largely as very poorly paid and badly treated sugarcane harvesters and many other such occupations. So now suddenly with these new possibilities, they are getting enough funds to change, to now become what one may call biosphere people with honor, that they have now resources to get many of the amenities of modern life, including smartphones and others, and stop this kind of desperate migration. So that, I think, is the way forward, that people must be empowered, given control over their resources, as has happened with these community forest resource allocations, and be enabled to honorably transit from ecosystem people into biosphere people, and not be driven from ecosystem people into ecological refugees. A very interesting parallel happened in India itself, that is to say, a demonstration of how community-based management was allowing people to maintain their ecological resources and live under relatively prosperous conditions, and that is Goa. In Goa, the Portuguese initially tried to do what the British did, which was to destroy community-based management. There is a system called Gaokari or communards in Goa. They tried to destroy but found out that that led to huge losses of agricultural tax revenues. So it allowed it to persist, and the only reason why Goa till 1961 had remained so completely green was this community-based management. After 1961, regretfully again, Indian government and its tool, the Forest Department, has been trying to disrupt this community management and promote activities of the moneyed interests like mining and ruining Goa's environment and people. One very notable example is the Shah Commission report into illegal mining in Goa. They have said that this illegal mining is destroying agriculture, destroying water resources, destroying fisheries, and making large amounts of money. The estimate that Shah Commission had was 35,000 crores, no small amount. government of Goa has not done a thing to get back this money, 35,000 crores from the mining interests at all. All they did was to make the false propaganda that the stoppage of mining because of the Shah Commission report is leading to great hardship for people, loss of huge employment. And they said at least 1,25,000 people have lost employment, and they promulgated a scheme to compensate them. Not by taking any money out of this 35,000 crore, but again from money taken from people's taxes. Goa government offered this. And how many people claimed? Only 5,000. This 1,25,000 being rendered jobless by stoppage of mines was a figment of imagination. So what is to be seen is very clear. So-called development is basically a exploitation of nature and exploitation of the common people of India to line the pockets of a relatively small number of rich. I may mention that much of what I have talked about with very detailed specific evidence is narrated, and if I may take the opportunity to mention that this book of mine, A Walk Up the Hills, Living with People and Nature, which is coming out in English, which has already come out in English by Penguins, and in Kerala, Mathrubhumi Books is publishing the Malayalam version, and in other parts of India, since I have fortunately many other friends, 8 Indian language versions: Marathi, Konkani, Kannada, Tamil, Hindi, Bengali, Telugu are also coming out within the month of August. So let me stop here. Once again, thanking the ZARINA Memorial Trust for giving me this opportunity to present my ideas to the learned audience of Kerala. Thank you very much. Namaskar.